Hello, everybody. It is Saturday night at 10 o'clock. This is Starfleet Tactical. I do not have Pat with me, but I do have TJ and Rob. And we were talking about Tim Dodd, the everyday astronaut, and what he knows and what he doesn't know. And we're going to continue that conversation very briefly, because my guess is there's a whole bunch of people out there that also pay attention to things like SpaceX and reusable rockets and all the rest of it. And I was just telling TJ and Rob that I finally got a line on the third Dandridge Cole book. For those who don't know who Dandridge Cole was, he was an aerospace engineer back in the 1960s, died relatively young at like 49, something like that. And you don't necessarily know his name, but you know about his work, because he's the first guy who suggested, for instance, digging into an asteroid, putting a bunch of ice in the core, spinning it, and using solar mirrors to heat it, and then the water flashes to steam and inflates it like a balloon. And he was the first guy who basically suggested asteroids as being something that you could use to make space colonies out of. And he did a whole bunch of other stuff like that too. And his books have been out of print for 50 years, and they're really, really expensive these days. And so for the second time, I'm going to pay north of $150 for something that's essentially was just like, a popular science book at the time. But I decided it was worth getting his stuff. So
that would have been like buying a physical copy of Ignition before they went and did the reprint.
Yeah, it would. So what TJ's referring to is Ignition is a fantastic book about the history of liquid-fueled rockets, about the early history, the research design of liquid-fueled rockets. And the interesting thing about liquid-fueled rockets is that basically all the research was done by 1970, right? There's a lot of engineering.
All the fuel was
all the fuel research. I was just about to amplify on that. All the fuel research was done by 1970. There's plenty of engineering on how to build rockets that's taken place since then. But in terms of like what can you use for rocket fuel, there's some things that you can use and should, some things that you can use and shouldn't. I especially like the one that was hypergolic when exposed to water, sand, and test engineers. Was a great line from that book, and it's available as an ebook. In fact, I got my copy from Scribd. I have a Scribd subscription and was able to read it there, and it's just a fantastic.
It went back in print.
Yeah. This is the back in print version. So there's two different types of stuff on Scribd. There's stuff that's up there as ebooks, and then there's stuff that's up there as scanned PDFs, and this one is up there as an ebook, and it was really pretty good.
There was a widely circulated and legal PDF that had gone around of Ignition for a long time too.
And for those who, I can't remember the name of the guy who wrote the book, but
John Drury Clark.
Yes. And so for those who like weird little juxtaposition sorts of things, he was married to Fletcher Pratt's widow. So if you're a war gamer, if you're a naval war gamer in particular, naval miniatures war gamer, Fletcher Pratt is the guy who did Fletcher Pratt's Naval War Game, which was a very, very popular game in like the 1940s. And afterwards, it was a range estimation game. It had a formula that you used to calculate the value of ships. The formula only applied to that portion of multidimensional space in which warships live. For instance, Titanic had a decidedly non-zero military value because it was so fast and had such great tonnage, and those heavily figured into it. So it's an excellent example of something that you can use to rate a design, but you shouldn't use it to actually guide your design because it leads you to weird places. And so that actually ties into a bunch of stuff that I've talked about in the past, like the design triangle, the Winchell-Chung design triangle and other things like that. Sometimes things like that are good tools for evaluating something, but you don't want to use them to actually guide your design because it leads to weird minimax problems. So.
Well, what's the quote? There's some quote that as soon as you use a metric to measure something, people begin to optimize to maximize the metric.
Yes.
Opposed to actually achieve the design result that the metric was supposed to stand in for.
Yeah, and that applies across the board. My boss at CNA at one point pointed out to his boss that there was a particular metric that they used to sort of guide people as to whether they were spending the right amount of time doing admin stuff versus doing non-admin stuff. And they, of course, wanted you to maximize your time charging to projects and not charging to admin. But Peter pointed out to his boss that the way the formula was set up, there were two ways that you could get a perfect score. One was to charge 0% of your time to admin, and the other one was to charge 100% of your time to admin.
Yeah.
And it was just a quirk of the formula. And so it's like, yeah, don't do that. I believe Dave Kelsey's actual response was, which he did a lot with Peter.
Yeah, so, there's the...
So a couple of things here. Wright says, this is obviously referring to the test engineer's comment. Sounds like the fuel for the ME-263. I think you're thinking of the wrong Messerschmitt. The 263 was the just regular jet engine one.
Yeah, that was the 262.
Oh, yeah. Then I think it's the 163 is the funky one, right? Wasn't it the 163 that was the rocket propelled hypergolic thing?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes. Which, if I'm recalling this correctly, was a hypergolic fuel inside an open-top tank, which is one of those decisions you really...
I'm not sure that it was... I don't think it was open-top because it vertically launched and then it horizontally landed. But there was an incident where they lost the XO of a squadron because... He had to do a very quick abort, and when he came in, he hit hard enough that the tank ruptured, and all the content sloshed forward and basically dissolved him.
Yeah.
So, Jen's asked the question. Oops, not that one. It was General Quarters based on that one. Basically, all of naval wargaming, machine age naval wargaming, probably owes some debt to both Fletcher Pratt and to Fred Jane's naval war game. Although Fred Jane said that he was going to do this naval war game, and that's why he was publishing these books. And then people kept saying, "Well, okay, where's the game? Where's the game?" And the game that he came up with was actually kind of, I mean, I don't know anybody that's played Fred Jane's game more than once because it was kind of weird. But Fletcher Pratt is an interesting game. It can be an interesting game, and I've seen people play it. So yeah, I think basically there's a couple of sort of foundational naval miniatures games and everybody else sort of owes a debt to them. So.
To bring that Natter section kind of full circle, that actually comes back to what we were discussing before the show about Tim Dodd, which is we were talking about Phil Bono and the single stage to orbit plug nozzle aerospikes.
Yeah.
Because for those who have not seen it, Tim Dodd, the Everyday Astronaut, recently got the opportunity to do a tour and an interview with the people behind a company called Stoke Space. They are working on building a 2-stage to orbit, fully reusable launch vehicle. The upper stage of which basically looks like a Phil Bono plug nozzle single stage to orbit vehicle. It's just sitting on a first stage booster, so it's actually got a chance of making orbit. And they don't, as far as I've heard, I haven't had a chance to watch the interview yet. It was on my plan for today and didn't happen, but they don't mention Phil Bono. And Phil Bono is one of these foundational people in aerospike single stage to orbit vehicles. But on the other hand, like you were talking about with Fletcher, you can be inheriting from Fletcher and not know it. because you're inheriting from people who inherited from Fletcher. And like you can be inheriting from Lensman and not know it because you're inheriting from people who inherited from Lensman and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I think, they may be thinking more along the lines of, well, they saw a picture of a Gary Hudson design once, and Gary Hudson cribbed a lot from Phil Bono.
Yeah, I think it was actually, I need to go back and re-listen to to Tim Dodd's Aerospike episode. I think it's actually, if it's not in there, that's actually a bigger oversight, because this was an interview, right? The entire time he was talking with the CEO of.
Right, and it's always a little weird to talk about.
Yeah, so there really wasn't an opportunity. It's not like he was doing the history of it.
Yeah, if the guy you're talking to brings up Phil Bono, then you talk about it. If he doesn't rate Phil Bono, it's like, did you know you're stealing from Phil Bono?
Well, the other thing to keep in mind is that you'll see this when you watch the Stokes Aerospace thing, but it would be probably more accurate to say they did a whole bunch of things that when you add it up, they're taking advantage of some of the things that were true of Aerospikes. They didn't actually set out to design an Aerospike.
No, they kind of walked into it backwards, though.
They kind of walked into it backwards. They walked into it by trying to make sure that they were trying to basically limit the number of engines they had to have. And I had sort of soured on the entire idea of Aerospikes because, on the one hand, you can optimize for low altitude performance and optimize for high altitude performance. But if you're going to do multiple stages, why not just optimize for whatever flight regime you're in? And these guys actually have a really good answer to that. And that answer is, it doesn't matter on the way up, but it matters on the way down.
Yeah, and that's a pretty valid point. You if you need sea level performance, though, you still run into the question of why not have a sea level engine and a vacuum engine, which is the way that SpaceX is doing it with Starship. But on the other hand, it doesn't, if it gets them into the realm where they can do a reusable cooled TPS, it's some interesting stuff. I'm interested to see the video. I think it will be interesting to see if they backed their way into finally flying Gary Hudson and Phil Bono's dream.
Yeah, I think it looks like they have, and it was pretty nifty, and I liked what I saw. So I've changed my position on Aerospikes once again. I've sort of flipped back to where I was before, because you think about an Aerospike in single stage to orbit is low altitude, then high altitude. And in this case, it's high altitude and then low altitude, right? They get to orbit with it and then they use it to land again.
Yeah.
But it's really pretty cool. I recommend to everybody that you go find it. It's Tim Dodd, the Everyday Astronaut. It's pretty easy to find. And I think it came out like either today or yesterday. So it's pretty nifty. But that having been said, one other thing I want to talk about, for those of you who were confused by the fact that Starfleet Tactical number 101 happened last night, we can thank Alec for that. Alec was having some production troubles, and he ended up just clicking on the first thing that gave him a working StreamYard window. And so his interview with Victor Canlis went out under the Starfleet Tactical banner. But TJ caught it this morning and sent me an email saying, "Hey, dude."
Text message
saying, "Hey, dude, do you know this?" And it's like, news to me. So I sent a message off to Alec, and Alec and I ended up talking on the phone for about a half hour as he was going through and sort of fixing it, et cetera, et cetera. So it's now at the point where the title has changed on the two copies that are up on YouTube to reflect what really happened. The only thing is that if you go there, instead of having the picture of or I said Victor, I think it's Vincent. Instead of having the picture of Vincent up there, it's got the Starfleet Tactical logo. And maybe we'll fix that at some point or another. But right now, that's what it is. But in any event, if you were confused by that, you're not the only one, but we got it fixed. So I then had to go in and recreate the show for tonight. So, and it did give me the opportunity to add the sort of subtitle on the end, Zenith, to part 4 of the Battles of Galactica. So now is probably time to turn it over to TJ and Rob, and you guys can go through what you've got for us tonight.
Sure. I think we've this is the fourth time we've seen this this cover slide. So we're gonna Battles of Galactica. Next slide. I'm TJ. I don't talk for anybody. This is my 9th time here. I'm on Mastodon. Thanks to my friends Fong, Usili, and Polish Eagle. Next slide.
I'm Rob. I'm not on camera tonight because of some laptop problems. I'm here a lot too. I am officially here as moral support, and I am even more additionally here as moral support this time because we have officially reached the point in Battlestar Galactica where in first run, I had stopped watching the show. So this has been some new stuff for me, helping TJ out with some of the analysis for this, though I do have some thoughts.
Next slide, please. So tonight we're going to be covering the performance of the remnant forces after they've evacuated from New Caprica and they've lost Pegasus. Nothing we say should decrease your enjoyment of the show. Home video releases, spoilers for everything. We don't own BSG.
As an example of things we should say that should not decrease your enjoyment of the show, stuff like this is after I stopped watching it in first run.
Yeah. Next slide, please, Chris. Recapping our first 3 nights. Those would have been Starfleet Tacticals 96, 97, and 99. That Battlestars, while they have the heavy gun battery, are first and foremost armored carriers, with that armor giving them the ability to stay in the fight for an extended period. This also means that the air group is the vital component of both offense and defense. Fundamentally, the ships use the air group to, if you're going to hit something, the ships use the air group to hit it most of the time. When they don't have the air group, those battle stars get very vulnerable very quickly to progressive damage. Once things start failing, they tend to start failing a lot. Particularly useful is if you have more than one battle star. And Admiral Adama no longer has more than one battle star. He's back down to 1, which is where we were at the start of the show, thanks to decisions that he made and that his command staff made. Next slide, please. So we're going to start with A Measure of Salvation. This is about a quarter of the way through season 3. The colonial forces on their hunt for Earth encounter an infected Cylon base ship. The Cylons on board are dying, and the base ship, because it is partially biological, is also dying. And everything is sort of not in good shape for the base ship. The colonials successfully identify the pathogen, discover that most humans are immune, and there is a decision made to use it as a biological weapon. The Captain Agathon, who's seen there closer to the camera on that image, is the acting XO of Galactica at this point, does not agree. He thinks that this would represent genocide and that if they do so, they are no better than the Cylons. This is not an opinion that a lot of people want to hear. The president is very vehement in her opposition to his statement about using a biological weapon being a crime against humanity. Next slide, please. So, Galactica by herself, the plan is to go spoiling for a fight in a known Cylon staging area, draw in a resurrection ship, and kill the infected Cylon prisoners because the Cylons think that the virus will, in fact, transfer when they resurrect. The Colonials just sort of take that at face value. Yeah, he's not wrong about it being a war crime. Or crime. He actually doesn't describe it as a war crime. He describes it as a crime against humanity. Something to keep in. Go on, Chris.
No, I was just going to comment that one thing that's sort of interesting about doing things in StreamYard and doing things on YouTube is that sometimes I post on the YouTube channel as me. Sometimes I post using the comment feature, in which case it goes out to both Axanar and Aries Studio. But anybody else who's on this, including Lissa, can post stuff there.
Hey.
So sometimes when you see something that comes out that says Aries Studio or Axanar, it's me, and sometimes it's Lissa. So it's funny because if it looks like we're having a discussion with ourselves, because I thought about responding to Lissa's comment with like, yeah, I agree. And then I realized that would kind of be really confusing for everybody because it sounds like I'm having some sort of psychotic break.
How about I pop in real quick? So it depends on how you determine what is humanity in this case. If you were going by biologically speaking, the human type Cylons are human. If you were talking about faction-wise, they are not.
On the other hand, we generally use crime against humanity in the way we speak of it, not as a crime against faction, but as a crime against a higher moral authority that may be extended beyond what is biologically or definitionally human.
And that's why here I would define it as just simply a war crime.
Yeah.
Because there's semantics that are involved as to whether or not the human type Cylons are human or not.
Right. And whether that should matter.
Exactly.
The Harkness test for war crime morality.
Well, they've already passed the Turing test. So they're sentient. They have their own faction and everything going forward.
The Harkness test too.
Yeah. Are we talking about Jack Harkness from Doctor Who? Yes. I mean, he'll fuck anything.
I'll leave Lissa to look up the Harkness test.
Yes.
The interesting thing that I find about the
should I Google the Harkness test while on camera? Really?
No.
Possibly.
No.
Go ahead.
I'm gonna remove myself now.
I'm gonna Google this.
I would note that also the Admiral Adama does note that deployment of biological weapons requires a direct written presidential authorization. And Rosalind goes and off. So Adama flat out admits he's passing the buck on this decision to Rosalind. And Rosalind calls him on it. He takes it and says, fine, yes, Rosalind makes the necessary authorizations to deploy the weapon. So Galactica goes. She leaves the fleet pretty well undefended, specifically for the purposes of getting into a combat situation to draw in a resurrection ship to kill the prisoners. The Cylons, the Cylons have a really high tendency of doing, to a large extent, what the Colonials think the Cylons are going to do. They actually jump in a base ship, and then a resurrection ship, and then a second base ship. They do exactly what the Colonials think, and it works. And the reason that this episode gets subtitled Zenith is because I think a strong case could be made that this is the point in A Measure of Salvation where Galactica is at her combat capability peak. Adama has the Galactica Air Group. He has the Pegasus Air Group. He's had about 50 days to integrate the two groups together. He has all of the spare parts and such that he had from prior to Pegasus. So the ship is probably in a better crewed and better equipped than it was at any point up through probably when they had two Battlestars before they started settling on New Caprica.
Yeah.
So, and we see in the combat situation, they deploy Vipers, they deploy Raptors. We see the Raptors getting used as missile pickets. And next slide, please. And while this is going on, Captain Agathon, who per the deleted scene has asked to be relieved of the duties of an XO for the duration of the mission, sabotages the life support system. he does it. The Cylons die before they can download into the resurrection ship and spread the virus. He does so. He knows what he's doing. He explicitly knows what he's doing. We get a line from him that, other than his wife, Sharon, the first thing he wants to see are the lights inside that CIC. But he has to be able to live with himself and live with his wife. So, which is why he prevents the delivery of the biological weapon. Admiral, go on.
If I remember correctly, isn't that the scene that there is a deleted scene where he tells Adama what he did?
He tells Adama what he did in a later episode. He does that in The Woman King.
Right, but I think it's a deleted scene. They didn't actually broadcast it.
Right.
And so, which I always find interesting because, of course, the actors knew that they filmed the scene, and so it's informing their performance. And that was like 5 episodes later. Yeah, but even so, it would inform his performance going forward from there, from when he found out. I don't know if Edward James Olmos, for instance, even watched the show. There is a claim that William Shatner never watched an episode of Star Trek.
The Lissa tacked in there, how would the biological weapons ship to the resurrection ship? It's on a computer virus. The in-universe explanations, the Cylons think there is a bioelectrical feedback component to the virus.
Yeah, and this is a universe where you can't detect that somebody's a Cylon, yet Sharon Valerii was perfectly able to just take a fiber optic cable and shove it into her arm and take over a computer that way.
Yes.
But you can't actually, the doctor can't detect that it's a Cylon, but you can just, but apparently
sometimes the science here is a little bit squishy. Were talking, TJ and I were talking about how the Cylons do what Galactica wants them to do, which is that they bring a resurrection ship into this fight for some reason.
Why would you do that?
On the other hand, why does the resurrection ship need to be here versus in range?
Right.
It needs to be here so we can see it. It needs to be here so we have that reason why we can't just
kill
do
the
it now.
science.
But it's a little bit squishy on the science. Sit down and have a long discussion with Dr. Baltar on the exact mechanics of that.
Or, Doc Cotter, you should be looking for USB-C ports.
Yeah,
well, in your X-rays.
Yeah.
Toss links, probably. Toss link, not USB-C. It's optical.
You're right. If it's a fiber optic cable, it's got to be toss link.
Yeah. I would note at this point, the Admiral, he is reluctant to use biological weapons in the first place. He doesn't launch an investigation. He knows. The President Roslin asked him who's going to head the investigation. He's like, there's not going to be one. He doesn't admit to Roslin that he knows. Roslin thinks that it's either him or his wife, Sharon, the Cylon. Adama knows that it's not Sharon. Sharon was out on a Raptor flying during the combat mission. Adama knows. Adama knows, and he lets Carl, Hilo, Agathon stay EXO for a further 5 months after he does this.
His bench isn't very deep.
His bench isn't very deep, and also I think he doesn't necessarily disagree with the action.
Right.
He disagrees with disobeying the order, maybe, but he doesn't actually. He kind of didn't want to be given that order, so there's an interesting question here. I think it's in a later episode where somebody accuses the fleet of devolving into a military dictatorship run by Adama.
Yeah,
it's not 100% wrong about that.
No, that's going to be in Night 5.
Yeah.
That's in Night 5.
If Adama doesn't think the colonial government should be doing something, he has a pretty powerful ability to say, actually, we won't.
Yeah.
He didn't hear because he was on the fence about it, but once it wasn't done, he didn't feel like it needed to be investigated why it wasn't done.
Yeah, well, and the other thing I'd have to say is that when you look at the Galactica bench, Carl Agathon is actually, I would argue, one of the high performers.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, Starbunk, of course, is just a shit show. She can be a high performer when she's not like going around punching people and just being psychotic. Lee can't decide if he wants to be a fighter pilot or a lawyer. He's kind of wishy-washy about stuff like that. Agathon really is kind of the rock at that point, and Adama is kind of building the command team on it.
And we learn later that Adama has two other senior captains, one of whom decides to do an impression of the Unabomber later, and another one Showboat, who was from Pegasus, who we see her in The Captain's Hand and in Razor, and we hear her being referenced all the way up, hear her being referenced late in season 3, and see her on the board in season 4. But we never see the actress again. So we know that she's there, and she was a captain. So she's somewhere in the staff. We just never see her. So yeah, his bench, he actually probably has a deep enough bench to replace Hilo.
Well, it's going to leave a hole someplace else.
Yeah, which is, of course, the thing that he finally kind of doesn't have any hole. So,
yeah.
Now that he's got the command staff off Pegasus and the command staff off Galactica. But anyway.
Right. And we actually had a line from Starbuck later in tonight's episode. But next slide, please. Hero. So we mentioned the hero problem earlier. The fundamental, and I'll address it later. But somewhere prior to the fall, Adama is tasked by the Admiralty to run a recon mission over the Armistice line. They do it. They a single low observable stealth star. It's a Viper. It's a stealthy Viper. It's launched from Valkyrie, which is a very small base star. The prop was a combination of Mark 7 and Blackbird props, but it's a stealthy little fighter. Next slide, please. The stealth star, it's in contact with Valkyrie the entire time, but it gets hit by an unknown assailant, which jumps away when it's just a single-digit number of kilometers over the line, and then 2 more contacts show up, and Adama, rather than start a war, blows it. Orders the stealth star destroyed using ship-to-ship missiles. This is all relevant because that pilot got captured by the Cylons and has been sent back to the fleet with the express intent of, they sent him back so that he'll try and kill Adama. He very nearly succeeds.
Did they wait until when it was within 12 kilometers of Myrtle Beach?
Not maybe. I don't know. Maybe 12 light years.
Anyway.
The problem, of course, with Hero is that the dialogue talks that these events were only taking place like a couple of years before the series, which doesn't fit with every other bit of dialogue in the show. So I take the approach that the Battlestar Wiki took back in 2007, 2008, whenever it was this aired, that you take every single bit of dialogue and you add 5 more years to the dialogue that's stated, and then it actually fits with all of the props, because the props have little dates on them that you can see in high definition. They're a weird date code that's really hard to read, but they have dates. So you bump it back 5 years, and these are, which means that our Bulldog, our pilot, spent like 7 or 8 years in Cylon custody as opposed to like 3 or 4. But that's still better. Also note that Carl Agathon is still XO of the ship. He is explicitly XO when the pilot comes back. He's standing in the CIC, and he's on the M1C. He's on the horn. He's like, "This is the XO action stations. Launch the alert fighters." Also to note that in the events of this episode, because Adama thinks that his actions with the Valkyrie were what started off the move toward the Cylon War, Adama proffers a resignation letter to Rosalind. In that resignation letter, we actually see at the bottom his recommendation that Apollo be made commander of Galactica and military forces, not Hilo or Tai. So while he trusts Hilo, he doesn't want to put Hilo as CO yet. Next slide, please. And this is Valkyrie. Valkyrie is described explicitly as a battle star, but Valkyrie is small. Valkyrie is 10% of a Jupiter, which is what Galactica is by mass. It's got 6 launch tubes, as opposed to Galactica, a Jupiter's designed 80. It's got gun coverage, gun and missile launch coverage that's a lot closer to that of a Jupiter than it does a Mercury. But it's still just this small ship, and it makes me think, oh, if this is a Battlestar, this is a CVE or a CVL to Galactica as a Lexington and Pegasus as, a Midway or a Forrestal. Rob, in the notes for this, a light Battlestar or a cruiser with the stroke of a pen were Rob's.
Yeah. What's interesting is we later see Valkyrie types, they reuse the models for stuff like defending colonies that we see pre-fall. So these may be designed to have all the capability of a Battlestar, or all of the capacity of a Battlestar, but less. I may have that backwards. All the capabilities, but less total capacity.
I'm trying to remember. I remember reading about the Valkyrie on some wiki, and I can't remember whether it was something that indicated how authoritative it was. But the argument was basically that Valkyries were what the fleet went to after the first Cylon War, for a while, and that the Admiralty really likes them because it gave them the ability to do coverage. Right, you can always mass more Valkyries together if you needed to mass them to have some punch, but you could spread them out, and you could that they weren't nearly as capable, but they were also a lot cheaper, and you could spread them out, and so they gave you better coverage.
Yeah, and there's some interesting stuff with the ability to jump fleet elements in and out and to do coordinated jumps and stuff. There may be some benefits to that, as far as, you need more command capability to run 18 Valkyries than to run 2 Jupiters. But on the other hand, 18 Valkyries can be in 4 different places, or can execute a complex plan to deploy more birds in more places and create a multi-vector threat on a Cylon force or something. So we don't, this gets to the question we were asking at the start: what is a Battlestar? We're asserting that the larger Battlestars clearly are operating like an armored carrier. This is we don't really see this in a full combat scenario, so it's difficult to talk about. Now, what a few things we know: it's still got a gun armament, it's got a missile armament that's at least capable of shooting down its own light craft, and we know that it's got at least 6 tubes. If you follow the logic that corresponds to that, this is probably capable of holding about a squadron.
Yeah,
a squadron and a half. It's probably got 4 birds or so for 3 or 4 birds for every tube, because it's probably got at least the bird in the tube, and then ready 5 or ready 15,
right,
and some in maintenance.
You're going to be able to fit the shuttles in those flight pods. You are not going to be able to easily, probably at all, fit a Colonial Heavy.
Yeah,
in those flight pods.
No, you couldn't. And so the things that occur to me about this, there's a couple of things. One is I'm reminded of Andy Presby's theory that Colonial Heavy is based upon a military design specifically designed to allow you to sort of function as mini base ships, so that you can deploy fighters out to a long ways from the Battlestar. And then that's why when Colonial Heavy showed up, there was docking tubes, etc., that matched up just perfectly. It's because that's what her design lineage was. That's why Lee Adama could actually dock his fighter on board, right? Is because
and that would certainly fit with and Valkyrie being designed to operate in some capacity like that would make sense. We certainly see Adama reaching for that kind of doctrinal tool when we in something like Hand of God, the ability to put Vipers on the colonial transporter cargo ships. That would be something that a Valkyrie would be really useful for as well.
I'm not convinced. Oh no, maybe I am convinced. I was just looking at some images, and maybe I am convinced that the Valkyrie is as small as TJ says it is. Another thing that's probably worth pointing out, because there in terms of some of the discussion that's taking place in the chat. So there was a reference made to CVLs, like light carriers, and CVEs, escort carriers. It's by no means clear to me that the people who did Battlestar Galactica think in those World War II U.S. Navy and British Navy sort of terms. But those a light carrier and an escort carrier are very different things.
Yeah.
An escort carrier is, even if it's purpose built, it's based on a merchant hull. It's designed to carry just a handful of fighters. It's really more about convoy escort as it was originally conceived, although we did use them for things like bombing islands during Leyte Gulf and stuff like that. So they generally operated older airplanes because you couldn't operate some of the newer, bigger airplanes from them. But they were very much sort of like crank them out. Light carriers were built towards more military standards.
They're built on cruiser hulls.
Yeah, they're built on cruiser hulls usually. The Brits, for instance, built the Colossus class light carrier, and they were intended to be throwaway vessels, right? They were not built. They didn't put a whole lot of effort making them very fancy or making them really rugged. Their thought was, we're building these through the war, and then we're going to decommission them. Ironically, some of those ships hung around forever, right? One of those ships ended up hanging around in Brazil or Argentina, one of those places.
Brazil.
Yeah, forever. Another one of those ships was the last Australian aircraft carrier. And I think the Brits kept one for a long time too.
The Indians had one forever.
The Indians had one forever. So they were intended to be ships, when they were conceived, when they were built, the thought was, we're going to keep these things for 5 years and then scrap them. And they lasted into like the 90s.
Yep.
Yeah, Vikrant was decommissioned from Indian service in 1997.
Yeah. It's really kind of amazing how long they lasted. So
the point being that the Valkyrie is something that is distinctly smaller than a regular than a Mercury or a Jupiter, but it does seem to have all of the bits of capability. It can launch fighters. It has gun armament. The Valkyrie Skyarcs are way better than a Mercury's. The Valkyrie Skyarcs are better than a Mercury's. You actually have Skyarcs to cover the entire ship.
And perhaps the goal of a Valkyrie is to, if things go in, it's to either do the thing that you need a Battlestar to do, which is to insert a fighter squadron and then provide long-range coverage with its missiles and its guns. Or it's when working with other Battlestars, you can send the Valkyrie into the area that's even too hot for a Mercury, which is why maybe it's got better coverage, as it's expected to jump in deeper into the main slugging fight to drop its fighters even closer to whatever the objective is.
Yeah, that I'd hate to be the guy who had to order that.
Yeah. On the other hand, it's got some very chunky armor. This is a very chunky ship.
Yep.
And I suppose if it's got an FTL drive that spins up very fast and can get them out pretty fast too.
Yeah. And and it may have an FTL drive that can spin up that fast because they were willing to deploy the one this close to the red line and insert something in what could be very provocative.
Mm-hmm.
I'm amazed at I'm impressed. I'm impressed by their ability to determine exactly where in deep space that red line is with such a high degree of precision.
Didn't ISS do some I think ISS did a demonstration of pulsar-based navigation that was able to determine its location to within like half a kilometer.
Maybe.
You basically use pulsars like GPS beacons or Warren beacons, and I'm trying to remember what they had like this washing machine sized thing that was able to do it, and
This is smaller, but this is still hundreds of meters long.
Yeah.
This is still not a small.
No. Okay, so the experiment that I mentioned on ISS was called Sextant, and it operated in 2018. And they demonstrated in 2 days they were able to get a 7-kilometer accuracy fix. So that's not exactly GPS levels. That would, in fact, put their distance to the red line within disputable measurements.
Right.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Moving on.
The Stealth Star.
Yeah, the Stealth Star, it's just, it fits inside the same tubes as it's a stealth fighter.
If anything, what we could say is that the Stealth Star is what the Blackbird turns into if you give a team of Colonial Fleet acquisitions people the Blackbird spec and tell them that they have a budget for it, as opposed to whatever Chief Tyrell can scrape off the deck.
Yeah.
Which again speaks to the fact that some of the Viper limitations may be doctrinal, or maybe a question of trade-offs that it has to make to do what it does. We don't, I think, explicitly know if it's got a jump drive.
No, we don't know. Ben's asked in the Ares Studio chat, no third engine or vertical fin. It actually has 4 engines, and it has the outboard lifting surfaces are actually canted down at a pretty steep angle.
Yeah, if you back up a slide or two, there's the image.
I don't think I actually got a very good shot.
There's one right there. So you can see the 4 engines. You can see the outboard surfaces are tilted down, but it does not have a vertical fin. So we don't know what that means as far as maneuverability, because it may mean it flies worse in atmosphere. On the other hand, atmospheric flight may not be a design criteria for it the way it is for a Viper. Who knows? We don't know a lot about this bird. It only shows up in this episode.
Yep.
But it does appear that the tricks that Blackbird does are not unique.
No.
It's almost like when you give Colonial Fleet a budget, they design something that looks like if you built the Blackbird model with some Mark 7 parts on it, like you had them just lying around.
Yep. Next slide, please. Although actually it's like, yep. Eye of Jupiter Rapture. Galactica, they have to go through a pulsar cluster, and because they have to get to a planet. It's got algae because their food is contaminated. While they are there, they encounter a temple that had been built thousands of years ago, but while they're there, also Cylons show up because there are personnel on the planet. Galactica has to hold in position. You get a standoff where Galactica is threatening to nuke the surface. If the Cylons don't pull most of their forces back, the Cylons do, and you have this tense standoff in space for the duration of quite a bit of these episodes. You get a Raptor being used to recon for ground forces. It's vulnerable to air defenses. It gets shot down. It's too bad that Raptors don't have a spot for a second person, and Apollo didn't have another officer, maybe trained in communications and electronics, that he could have put on the bird. Oh, wait.
Well, this seems to be a little bit of a misuse of the asset.
Yeah. Bit of a failure of leadership and personnel management. Partially because the pilot is Starbuck, who he's having at least an emotional affair with. And the other officer he could have put on is Dualo, who is his wife. There's limited ground combat, the threat of the nuclear ground strikes. It successfully defers the Cylons. I would note that this is the first and only colonial use of resurrection to insert an agent aboard a Cylon ship, and that operation is not sanctioned. It turns out that Carl and Sharon's kid is alive and is on the Cylon ship. And Sharon convinces Carl to shoot her so that she can then download and resurrect with the Cylons and get their kid and get back to Galactica. That mission is successful. And from what we can tell, that mission does not immediately endanger any information that Sharon Athena Agathon has. Next slide, please. Maelstrom, the fleet is running refueling ops, and while they're doing this, they get in close orbit among a gas giant, which is providing them it's blanking out everybody's Dratus, which is they're using as cover while they're taking the time to do these fleet ops. You'll note that those Vipers are flying inverted there. Hot Dog starts flying inverted and gets asked by Starbuck, "What are you doing?" And he's like, "I get the opportunity to fly over blue skies. I haven't had that since New Caprica." They combat in New Caprica at this point was 9-10 months ago. He's taking the opportunity to fly with blue skies, and Starbuck thinks about it, realizes what he's saying, flips her bird over, and continues to fly inverted. The problem is that Starbuck is actually like going crazy at this point, and she's seeing things that aren't there, and she goes in after it, and eventually her Viper breaks up without a parachute. You can't really see it, but that's her Viper exploding, and then the other semi-bright little dot, that's Apollo, who's been flying in after her and has to pull up before he gets crushed as well. Prior to she commits suicide via Viper, she is described as Apollo as CAG is relaying to Adama as Commander what Doc Coddle, the CMO on Galactica, says as physically fit but an emotional basket case. Apollo also notes, in peacetime he'd ground us all, and she's still the best Viper driver he's got. So the horrible case of PTSD that Chris mentioned last time, yeah, everybody's got it. Everybody's got it. And so ends that part of the story of Starbuck. Next slide, please. And our next bit of combat we come to at the end of season 3 with Crossroads Part 2 and He That Believeth in Me. Why? Because the battle starts at the end of season 3 and goes into season 4. And this is the Battle of the Ionian Nebula, and the Colonial Fleet gets there and promptly loses all power. And from what I can tell, they lose power for about 7 minutes. And then power comes back on, and now they're going to have to spin up their FTL drives from a cold start, and that's going to take 20 minutes. The only problem is that the Cylons have also showed up. Before we get further, next slide. Sorry. The Cylon forces are there, and Adama orders all the pilots in the air, including those who have started but not completed air combat maneuver training, and those pilots who are not on active duty. He says put everybody up in the air. And all but one of his pilots go in the air. The one that doesn't go up in the air is Carl Agathon, who had been temporarily filling in as CAG because Apollo is trying to decide if he wants to be a lawyer or not. Except he's also filling in as Galactica's XO because Ty starts going on another bender. We are 4 months after Carl Agathon stopped being XO, and now he's back being XO again. Probably people weren't really when Ty goes on starts going on the second bender, people are probably not expecting him to come back quite as quickly, because it took him 8 months after New Caprica to get his act together. They're thinking, yeah, he's going to be out for a while. There is some interaction between at the end of Crossroads Part 1 between Hilo and Gaeta, where Hilo's like, the Colonel will pull himself together, and Gaeta's like, yeah, right. It's a brief moment of levity in that, but Ty has somehow managed to pull himself together enough to be in the CIC, and thus Hilo goes back to just being the CAG. I would think that anyone who's ever held a stick, I'm not sure. My notes say that they might actually have more physical fighters than they do pilots at this point, trained pilots. Maybe that's just trained pilots who aren't, in the middle of having their rest period because they just got off of a 10-hour cap. Next slide, please. And this point, Adama orders Galactica. The Cylons have shown up in number. We've got like 3 or 4 base stars that have shown up, and there's a whole bunch of missiles being launched. And Galactica he orders that for Galactica to tank the hits while the defensive fire is entirely protecting the civilians, on the grounds that Galactica can probably survive the hits, but the rest of the colonial civilians, Remnant, can't. And we see ships blowing up, and we see ships being very heavily damaged. I would say it's actually any one part of this battle is somewhat hard to very specifically follow. But even with that, it doesn't feel disjointed. You get a sense the entire time of what's going on. The 20,000 feet big picture view. You get a sense of what they're doing. So as I noted earlier, from power down to power up is about 7 minutes. Yeah, and this fight goes on for about 12. Next slide, please. Why does the fight end? A Cylon Raider scans Ensign Sam Anders. This is the late Starbuck's husband. She is the person who Starbuck went back to Caprica at the end of season 2 to grab off the planet. The Cylons scan him. His eye does a weird red ring thing. The Cylon force breaks off and disengages. And it scans him, and they break off like that. It's literally 5 seconds. Cylon scans him, flips around, and pulls away, and all of the other Raiders pull off. Yeah, he's got Jen's notes. He has plot armor. Well, maybe. Next slide, please. I'm sorry. Oh, great. I forgot one part. So the colonial forces have held off for about 12 minutes of Cylon, and they are not winning. They are fighting a holding action that they are losing. And they are going to have to hold for at least another 8 minutes before those FTL drives can get spun up. So the fact that the Cylons are pulling out is the only thing that probably saves the colonial remnant in that moment.
Yeah. Hold the line. Nobody gets through. It's the battle of the line all over again.
And they are not winning. They are not winning. So next, the end of night 4. Doctrine has evolved to include some leverage of resurrection, intentionally or not. The command and control is being very heavily stressed in the situation. And as Rob notes, under Star Trek rules, XOs are allowed to commit mutiny once per season. And Carl Agathon definitely seems to be taking advantage of that. I would note that because we covered season 3, We didn't cover the extrajudicial punishment stuff in Collaborators. We didn't cover that weird flashback-laden boxing episode. There's the passage where they have to. There's a whole lot of stress being thrown on non-combat stress being thrown on the combat crews, and there's a serious civil unrest in Dirty Hands. And oh, by the way, as we just saw, something's up with Ensign Anders, and there must be some kind of way out of here. And those that have seen it, know what I'm saying there. And that, maybe even 5 spoilers. Maybe even 5 spoilers.
Yep.
We are going to go to a 5th night. Maybe that was part of the plan all along. Maybe we had a plan.
Yeah. I always said that the lesson of the plan was the Cylons had a plan and it was really, really dumb.
If you're going to watch the plan, I would watch the plan after season 4, episode 15. No exit. If you're going to watch
it about when it came out?
No, it came out after the show ended.
Did it really?
Yeah.
I thought it come out. All right. I lost track. There were so many webisodes and this and that and the other thing and Razor and all the rest of it that I lost track of.
Yeah. No. The solution is you watch the miniseries. You watch season 1, episode 1 through season 2, episode 17. Watch the first 2 Razor webisodes. Watch Razor. Watch the last 2 Razor webisodes. Then you watch the rest of season 2. Then the Occupation.
There were Razor webisodes.
There were Razor webisodes. They got remember all the first Cylon War stuff in Razor. The stuff with Dama.
Yeah,
they were released as a part of. Yes. They were released as webisodes ahead of time, and there was more content in the webisodes that was not in Razor.
Okay, I had forgot. I don't think of those as Razor webisodes, but yeah, I know. Roger that.
So you go through, you watch the Occupation webisodes, season 3, the first half of season 4, 411, Face of the Enemy webisodes, 412 through 415, the plan, 416 through 421.
Okay, so we've got.
I will include a watch this order slide in night 5.
Yeah.
I have to comment. This is a very the thing that strikes me about this is I've been reading a book that my wife got, which was a translation of like all of the major historical books by the title On War or Art of War.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like Sun Tzu and Clausewitz and Machiavelli. And I just got to Jomini. And the translation of Jomini that it includes is the one by G.H. Mendel in 1862. G.H. Mendel and W.P. Craighill.
Okay.
1862, right at the start of the Civil War. And they're writing for an audience. They're writing for... In their introduction to their translation, they talk about how they're writing for this audience of the American public at large, because in a country that is fearful of a large standing army, it is important that the people at large be as informed as the standing army might be in other nations of the ways of war. And then they specifically give their like machete order for, if you're not a serving military officer, we recommend you start with chapter 3 and read to the end, and then come back and read chapters 1 and 2. I thought it was really funny that this is like one of the definitive translations of this book, and it's got a machete order in the internet.
Yeah, well, Germany. So,
What's that? What's that, Chris?
I said, yeah, Germany.
I would note that the Face of the Enemy webisodes did not end up on any of the Region 1, Region A releases. They are only on the Japanese Blu-ray release.
Is that the one in the Raptor?
Yes.
Yeah, that's available online somewhere, though.
Well, everything is available online if you know how to look.
Yeah, I mean, I went looking for it. It wasn't hard to find.
I think Vimeo. No, not Vimeo. Daily Motion, I think, is where I saw it most recently.
Yeah, something like that. So it was actually, in fact, I think I even downloaded it. So, but, well, this was, as always, this was a great episode. Thank you very much for doing this, TJ.
No problem. I have enjoyed doing this, and we've got one more night, whenever that's going to end up being.
Well, we should actually talk about that as to whether, because it occurs to me that it might be worth spending a night on Razor, and it might be worth spending a night on Blood and Chrome.
We already spent time on Razor.
We talked about it in terms of the admirals, but we didn't actually talk about it in terms of like just sort of going through and talking about the episode writ large, right?
Okay.
So and I'm that is something that I've got some thoughts on, and it gives me an excuse to rewatch those. So
yeah,
maybe what we should do is we should plan on doing the night 5 that we've got planned and focus on closing out.
Yes. Oh no.
Closing out the second Cylon War, and then we can go back and talk about some of the pre-fall and first.
Totally. I'm not suggesting adding this onto the series. I'm suggesting like as something for the future. We need to finish out night 5. So that is not going to be next week because I am traveling. I'm leaving town on Friday, and I'm going to be gone for 2 weeks and not getting back until that following Friday. So next week I will be in the DC area, and the week after that I will be in the Norfolk area. I think that second week, though, I'm going to try to do a show from my friend Brian Haven's house. Brian Haven is another BU 9 member. So my goal is to have everybody on BU 9, former BU 9 people, to come on the show one at a time. And so I'm going to try to do the show from his house. So are you guys available the week after next?
Should be.
Should be.
Okay. So let's tentatively plan for episode 5 of this series to be not next week. Next week's a week off. The week after that.
I haven't done 2 weeks in a row outside of the first. I don't think I've done 2 weeks in a row this entire series.
That could very well be true, and that certainly wasn't how I planned this. But it's just with my schedule being what it is, and Pat's also unavailable next week, also, so I can't just turn it over to him. But I forget where he is, but he's like flying or something.
Well, I'll give me time to actually.
We can just let Alec host Tactical next week.
So he might actually be up for that because he's done with the shoot. I did talk with him today for 20 minutes or so, as I said, and he said the shoot went great.
Glad to hear it. I'm glad to hear it. I know they
were able to actually shoot more actors than they thought they were going to be able to fit in, and so that's going to make things easier because there's people that they're not going to have to shoot in California that they were able to shoot here, so they made that work. So that was good. That was good. So, anything else we need to talk about tonight?
I don't think so.
Stay warm because it got really cold.
Yeah, you guys.
Everybody stay warm on the East Coast.
Yeah, you guys mentioned that you don't speak for your employer. I don't speak for my employer either. I keep forgetting to say that since Christmas. Yeah. So, there was something else I was going to say, and I can't remember what it is now. Oh, I'm still moving forward with the idea for Marcon. In fact, I was talking to Alec about Marcon, and there's going to be some more conversations about Marcon. So for those who don't know what I'm planning, I've actually reserved a VIP suite. So it's like the size of 2 or 3 regular hotel rooms as sort of a meeting place. So if you're available the last weekend in Memorial Weekend towards the end of May, and you feel like you want to go to Columbus, Ohio for a science fiction convention, I've got one for you to come to. And we're talking about going to Dayton the next day on that Monday. So everybody would stay. Anybody who wants to do this could stay through Sunday night and wake up Monday morning, and then we'd all go over to Dayton, which is about an hour away from Columbus, and go to the Air Force Museum, which is a fantastic museum. So
we'll see what my schedule looks like. But yeah, no, I'm definitely be up for that if my schedule works out.
So Lissa tells me that her birthday is that weekend, apparently. So
yeah, my birthday is May 27th. I am not doing jack or shit. I am going to the Renaissance Festival. Thank you.
Sounds like
I
fun.
haven't been to a Renaissance Festival in a long time. I've heard about people will go to Renaissance festivals dressed in Star Trek uniforms.
Yeah, okay, so Georgia Renaissance Festival actually has a cosplay weekend. So, like, people come in Star Wars, Star Trek. I've seen them in, like, anime cosplays. Like, one year, I was volunteering with Georgia Heartland Humane Society that year during cosplay weekend. So, like, I did, like, a semi, like, Renaissance version of the Joker out of, like, stuff I had on hand. Another year I went on cosplay weekend, I had my TARDIS dress on.
The Ohio Renaissance Festival has a time travelers weekend.
Has a what?
Time Travelers weekend is basically cosplay weekend.
So Stephen Ross says that his birthday's tomorrow. Happy birthday!
Happy birthday, Stephen!
So
Let's wrap it up before we get to his birthday.
I'm sorry, what?
Let's wrap it up before we get to his birthday then.
Yeah, let's do that. But Bob says Starfleet podcast from the Ren Fair. I don't see that happening. And anyway, going back to Star Trek, people dressed as Star Trek would show up at Renaissance festivals. There apparently was one guy who worked at the Renaissance Festival who, under his lapel of his costume, he had a Star Trek communicator badge. And so these people would show up and he'd say, like, "Excuse me, my lord, my lady, may I speak with you over here for a second?" And pull them aside, and then he'd flash them the badge and say, "What the hell are you people doing? Have you ever heard of the Prime Directive? Who's your commanding officer?"
That's great.
I've been embedded in this culture for the last 5 years, and you guys just ruined it all.
That's wonderful. That's perfect.
Yeah, that sounds fantastic. Yeah, are you okay, TJ?
You good? You good? Sure.
Yeah, I love that. That's a fantastic idea. So,
Yes.
So 2 weeks.
2 weeks.
2 weeks.
2 weeks.
So, well, everybody, I think it's probably time for us to call it a night.
Yep.
So, thank you, everybody. See you later.